0 seconds. It starts without a sound. Every thermometer on the planet begins dropping simultaneously. It drops 10 degrees Celsius or 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Not a cold front moving in from the north. Not a storm system. The cooling is happening everywhere at once, across deserts, rainforests, open ocean, and city centers. And it doesn't stop. Most people are asleep. The world outside their windows is already changing. 1 minute later. Weather stations start sending data that makes no sense. Meteorologists on night shifts are looking at global maps where every reading is falling in unison. The first assumption is equipment failure, because the alternative, that sensors on 6 continents are reporting the same pattern simultaneously, is harder to accept. Satellite data confirms it within minutes. The entire atmosphere is cooling at once. No storm does this. No natural weather system does this. Whatever is happening, it's happening to the whole planet. 10 minutes later, water on road surfaces begins freezing. Bridges ice over before the first car has reported anything. This matters because bridges lose heat from both above and below. They're the first things to freeze in any cold event, and in cities that rarely see frost, they're also the last things drivers expect to be dangerous. In places like Warsaw or Berlin, where people know winter, the black ice is a hazard. In cities like Houston or Atlanta, where the roads have no grit trucks on standby and most drivers have never handled ice. The first hour of morning commute will be catastrophic. Fields across Ukraine that were progressing toward harvest crunch underfoot. The soil temperature, which changes far more slowly than air temperature, hasn't dropped yet, but the crops standing above it have. Ice crystals are forming inside plant tissue right now, rupturing cell walls from the inside. It's invisible damage, and it's permanent. 30 minutes later. In the far north, the situation tips into immediately dangerous. Northern Siberia drops into temperatures where exposed skin freezes in under 10 minutes. The communities there are built for cold, insulated housing, winter gear, heating systems designed for brutal winters. But those systems run on fuel, and fuel is delivered by road and air on schedules calibrated for normal consumption. At triple the normal heating rate, a settlement with 2 weeks of reserves has maybe 5 days. The math changes overnight, literally. And the roads that would bring more fuel are already becoming difficult. Remote communities in northern Canada face the same problem. The heating infrastructure works. The supply chain behind it doesn't scale to this. 1 hour later, every building on Earth turns its heat on at once. Power grids are not designed for simultaneous continent-wide demand spikes. They're designed around predictable peaks, cold mornings, hot afternoons that operators can anticipate and manage. What's happening now is every home, every apartment block, every office building in the Northern Hemisphere activating heating systems at the same time with no ramp up and no warning. In Texas, this specific failure mode already happened in February 2021. A winter storm pushed heating demand beyond what the grid was built to handle, and millions of people lost power in freezing temperatures for days. The grid wasn't upgraded after that event to handle anything significantly worse. What's arriving now is significantly worse, colder, broader, and with no end date. Within an hour, the same cascade that took days to develop in 2021 begins developing in hours. Generators trip offline, demand outpaces supply. The first neighborhoods go dark. The difference this time is that it's not just Texas. Every grid that serves a population not built for sustained extreme cold is running the same race against the same math. Sunrise. The sun comes up and the world looks like a different planet. Las Vegas sits under snow, not a dusting, actual accumulation on the Strip, on the desert roads, on the palm trees lining the boulevards. The city has almost no snowplows because it has almost never needed them. The roads are impassable. The hotels are full of guests who can't leave and staff who couldn't get in. The casinos are open because they're running on backup power and have nowhere to send anyone. In Cairo, frost covers the ground around the pyramids at Giza. The temperature there is hovering just below zero, which in a city where the infrastructure assumes a winter minimum of around 10 degrees Celsius means burst pipes, failed heating systems, and a population that owns almost no winter clothing. A city of 22 million people is waking up to conditions it has never planned for and has no equipment to manage. The visual shock is real, and it's everywhere. But the visual shock is not the problem. The problem is everything behind it. 12 hours later. The crop losses are already done. Most people just don't know it yet. A 10 degrees Celsius temperature drop kills most actively growing crops outright. The mechanism is simple. Ice crystals form inside plant tissue, expand, and rupture the cells. The plant doesn't wilt, it collapses. By morning, wheat fields across Ukraine that were weeks from harvest are black and flat. Corn across the American Midwest, which needs warmth to develop and cannot survive a hard freeze at any growth stage, is dead in the ground across millions of acres. The citrus groves in Florida have been rebuilt repeatedly after freeze events. 1983, 1985, 1989 all caused major losses. Each time the industry recovered over years. What's in the ground now is gone, and unlike those previous freezes, the cold isn't lifting. There's no recovery window this season, or possibly next. Rice paddies across northern India and southern China are in cold shock. Rice is particularly sensitive. Below about 15 degrees Celsius, it stops growing, and below 10 degrees Celsius, the damage is permanent. The temperature just dropped by 10 degrees Celsius everywhere. The rice crop across a region that feeds over 1 billion people has effectively ended this morning. The world still has stored grain, but stored grain is what you eat while the next harvest grows. The next harvest isn't growing. One day later, power is failing in the cities least built to handle cold. The Texas grid loses sections through the day as demand keeps climbing and generators that weren't designed for sustained extreme cold operation begin tripping offline. Neighborhoods that had heat in the morning lose it by afternoon. The situation is the same across every region where cold winters were historically rare. The American South, parts of Central Europe, the Middle East, northern India. The grids there were sized for their normal climates. This is not their normal climate. In a city that loses power in a freeze, the problem compounds quickly. Electric heating is gone. Then, as pipes inside walls freeze and burst, water pressure drops. Then, as temperatures inside buildings fall toward outside temperatures, the window for safe shelter closes. A house without heat in minus 10 degrees Celsius. Outside air becomes dangerously cold inside within hours. An apartment building without heat becomes uninhabitable within a day. The emergency services, fire departments, ambulances, police are simultaneously overwhelmed and degraded. The calls are coming in faster than normal. The roads they need to travel are iced, unplowed, and increasingly blocked by accidents. 2 days later, water infrastructure was engineered with specific frost depths in mind. Every city buries its water pipes below the depth where the ground normally freezes in winter. In Minnesota, that's about 6 feet. In Houston, it's almost nothing, because the ground there almost never freezes. A 10 degrees Celsius global drop pushes the freeze line well below what most cities designed for. Pipes that should be safely underground are freezing and cracking. When a water main bursts, it doesn't just cut off supply. The water that escapes floods the surrounding ground, then freezes, creating an expanding mass of ice that damages other pipes, undermines road surfaces, and makes the repair work significantly harder. City crews trying to respond to one burst main find 3 more by the time they arrive. High-rise buildings depend on electric pumps to push water to upper floors. Where the power is out, those pumps are off. Residents above the 6th floor turn on the tap and get nothing. In a building of 50 floors, that's most of the building. People start carrying water up staircases in whatever containers they own, or they leave. 3 days later, the smallest northern settlements are starting to run out of time. A remote town in northern Canada with 800 people and a heating fuel supply built for 2 weeks of normal winter consumption has been running at 3 times that rate since the temperature dropped. The road that brings resupply runs through terrain that's now buried under snow. The local equipment can't clear fast enough. The aircraft that could reach them can't land safely in the visibility conditions. The decision to evacuate isn't straightforward. Leaving means driving or flying into conditions that are also dangerous. Staying means running the heaters until the fuel is gone, and then having nothing. Most communities choose to leave. Military transport aircraft are reaching some of them. Others are driving south in convoys, slowly, on roads that are barely passable. These are the first displacement flows. The people moving are measured in the hundreds and thousands right now. That number is going to grow. 5 days later. Farmers across the Great Plains are making a decision no farmer wants to make. The cattle in outdoor fields can't be sustained, the pasture is buried under snow that isn't melting, and the supplemental feed has to be carried in over roads that are increasingly difficult. The water troughs are frozen solid. Heating them requires electricity that is intermittent. Bringing the entire herd indoors requires barn space and heating capacity that most operations simply don't have at this scale. So animals that can't be sustained are being slaughtered. The meat floods local markets over a few days, then the supply drops off completely. A dairy herd that took years to build and produces milk every day is gone in a week. Rebuilding it, when the conditions eventually allow, will take years. The egg-laying operations in Europe and China are losing birds as poultry barns lose heat. Chickens are more temperature sensitive than most people realize, and a barn that drops below a certain temperature kills the flock quickly. The livestock losses are quieter than a crop failure. They don't make the same dramatic images, but protein is disappearing from the food supply at a rate that stored grain can't replace. 1 week later. The snow isn't melting because the temperatures aren't recovering. This is the detail that separates a severe cold snap from something structural. In a normal winter event, even an extreme one, temperatures eventually rise and snowpack eventually recedes. Here, the baseline has shifted. The snow that fell on day 1 is still on the ground. The snow that fell on day 3 is on top of it. The Baltic Sea, which freezes over only in the harshest winters, is developing ice cover across its northern reaches. Sections of rivers that haven't frozen in living memory are icing over. White ground reflects sunlight. Dark ground absorbs it. As more of the Earth's surface disappears under snow and ice, more incoming solar energy gets reflected back into space instead of warming the planet. The cooling feeds itself, not quickly, but measurably. Scientists who study ice ages know this mechanism well. They're watching it activate in real time. The growing season across the northern hemisphere is effectively over. What grows next depends entirely on whether and when the temperature recovers. And right now, there's no sign it will. 2 weeks later. People are leaving the north in steady, growing numbers, not in panic. More like a calculation that enough people are making simultaneously that it shows up in the data. Highway traffic heading south out of cities like Minneapolis, Calgary, and Montreal is running at 2 to 3 times normal volume. Rail passenger numbers on southbound routes out of Scandinavia are at capacity. The people leaving are mostly those who have somewhere to go, family further south, money for temporary housing, enough fuel to make the drive. The people who stay are often the ones who can't leave. The elderly, the poor, the people with no network outside the city. They're the ones most dependent on the systems, heat, water, food delivery, that are under the most strain. The cities receiving this movement are warm enough to be livable, but weren't built for the population now arriving. Shelter capacity fills, food distribution gets tighter. The infrastructure works, but it works harder, and it wasn't designed with margin for this. 3 weeks later. The food supply is narrowing in ways that are now visible to ordinary people. Fresh produce in northern cities comes largely from warm climate-growing regions: Spain, Morocco, California, Mexico, southern China. Those regions still exist and are still producing, but they're producing into a distribution network that has been disrupted at multiple points. Refrigerated trucks are moving through regions where fuel is harder to source. Ports are operating at reduced efficiency. The volume arriving is lower, and the price reflects it. Bread is still on the shelves. Canned food is available. But the fresh food section of a supermarket in London or Toronto looks sparse in a way that people notice, and the noticing changes behavior. Buying patterns shift towards stockpiling. The stockpiling accelerates the emptying. Food banks are running at twice their normal volume with half their normal donations. This is not famine. Famine is months away, if it comes at all. But the gap between supply and demand is now visible to anyone who goes grocery shopping, and visible gaps have a way of closing faster than anyone expects. 1 month later. A month in, the planet has sorted itself into places that are holding and places that aren't. The tropical and subtropical regions in southern India, sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, Brazil, Mexico, took the same 10 degrees Celsius drop but started from higher temperatures. Minus 10 degrees Celsius is a disaster. Plus 15 degrees Celsius is a cool day. Their crops are stressed but alive. Their infrastructure, designed for warmth, is functioning. These regions have become the most agriculturally important places on Earth almost overnight because they're the ones still producing food. The mid-latitude cities, London, Paris, Tokyo, New York, Chicago, are operating under emergency conditions. Power comes in rotations. Water is available but under pressure. Food is rationed informally by price in some places and formally by distribution centers in others. The cities are functioning, but they feel like cities in wartime. Quieter, more careful, focused on immediate needs. The northern tier is the problem that doesn't have a solution yet. Helsinki and Stockholm are running on emergency protocols indefinitely. Moscow is managing, but the scale of the Russian interior, vast, cold, dependent on supply lines that are increasingly unreliable, is a crisis that's still unfolding. Northern Canada and Alaska have shed population rapidly. The towns that were emptied in the first weeks stand quiet under snow, and no one knows whether they'll be resettled or whether the maps will simply be redrawn around them. The cold came in one night, quietly, without warning, while most of the world was asleep. A month later, the consequences are everywhere, in empty fields, in crowded southern cities, in the slow arithmetic of how much food is left and how many people need it, and how long the gap between those two numbers can be managed before it stops being manageable.